I never thought I would find myself in a situation where I'd be staring at the remnants of a shattered life, but here I am. My name is Matt, and my story is about betrayal, revenge, and a lesson learned the hard way. My wife, Jessica, and I had what I thought was a solid marriage. We had been together for nearly 10 years, and while life was not always perfect, we had built a comfortable life together. We had a modest home in a nice suburb, and I had a decent job in tech. Jessica was a high school teacher, and I admired her passion for educating the next generation. We shared laughter, love, and even the mundane moments that come with being married. But little did I know, things were about to take a dark turn. It started with small changes. Jessica was more distant, often lost in her phone or absorbed in her work. I noticed she began leaving the house earlier than usual and coming home later, with vague excuses about planning lessons or attending teacher workshops. It seemed innocuous enough at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore my doubts, convincing myself that maybe she was just stressed from work. However, I began to pay more attention and the signs became harder to overlook. One fateful evening, I returned home earlier than usual from a work event. The house was quiet, and when I stepped inside, I was hit by an unsettling feeling. Jessica's car was in the driveway, yet she wasn't home. I shrugged it off, figuring she was out running errands. As I made my way through the house, I noticed her phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, my heart racing. I shouldn't have, but I unlocked it, and that's when I stumbled upon a conversation that shattered everything. Text messages filled with flirtation, innuendos, and explicit plans to meet up with someone named Ryan. I froze. My stomach churned as I read through the messages, filled with lies and deceit. She talked about how excited she was for their next encounter, how he made her feel alive. It felt like a punch to the gut. I had never felt so betrayed in my life. How could she do this to me? The anger washed over me like a tidal wave, drowning out all rational thought. When Jessica walked through the door an hour later, I confronted her. My voice shook with rage as I demanded an explanation. Her initial reaction was a mix of shock and denial. "What are you talking about, Matt?" she said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. But as I laid out the evidence in front of her, her demeanor shifted. The tears came, but they felt more like a performance than genuine remorse. "It's not what you think. I was just venting," she claimed, her voice rising defensively. That's when the lies started rolling off her tongue like a practiced script. She claimed Ryan was just a friend she confided in about her frustrations with me. She tried to paint me as the villain for not being there for her, for not understanding her needs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I thought I knew, the one I loved, was morphing into someone unrecognizable before my eyes. I felt a surge of anger mixed with deep sadness. My heart was racing, and I couldn't hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. This moment, this confrontation, was a turning point. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice and my entire world was about to tumble down. The emotional impact was overwhelming. I had trusted Jessica with everything, my heart, my life, and our future. Now, it felt like I was holding nothing but the shattered pieces of a dream. As I stood there, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through me, I realized I had a decision to make. I could continue to fight for a marriage that felt broken beyond repair, or I could start focusing on myself and my future. It was a heavy realization, but somewhere deep down, I knew I had to take control. The betrayal would not define me. Instead, I would redefine my path moving forward. I needed a plan, something that would not only bring me closure but also empower me in a way that no one else could. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would lead to unexpected twists and turns. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The first step was clear. I had to outsmart the woman who had betrayed me, and I was going to do just that. After that fateful confrontation, I felt like I was living in a fog. Jessica's betrayal clouded my mind. The days stretched on, each one feeling heavier than the last. I was angry, hurt, and frustrated, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was my moment to take charge, and I needed to channel my emotions into something productive. Revenge was not just about retaliation. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring I came out on top. As I navigated through my thoughts, I decided I had to make a plan. I didn't want to just wallow in misery. I wanted to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of our crumbling marriage. The first thing I did was to gather evidence of Jessica's infidelity. I started with her phone. I knew I couldn't keep it forever, but I took screenshots of the messages with Ryan and any other incriminating evidence I could find. I also began to pay closer attention to her behaviors, her patterns, the time she was gone, and any details that could be useful later on. I took the next few weeks to observe and document every little thing. Jessica continued her elaborate charade, insisting that everything was fine while sneaking out for late-night teacher meetings or texting Ryan whenever she thought I wasn't looking. I felt a mix of disgust and determination. I knew I was setting myself up for something big, but I wasn't quite sure what shape it would take. In the midst of this emotional chaos, I also turned to my work. My job in tech had allowed me to dabble in investments, and I had been fortunate enough to have some successes, but I had never fully committed to it. But now, with everything on the line, I decided to take it seriously. I began researching stocks, market trends, and investment opportunities that could increase my wealth. My goal was to secure my financial future, especially since I now had to consider the possibility of divorce. Then came a stroke of luck. At a networking event, I met a financial advisor named Sarah who had a great reputation. I struck up a conversation with her, and I felt an instant rapport. I told her about my interest in investments and my desire to grow my portfolio. She was enthusiastic and offered to help me devise a strategy tailored to my goals. I didn't tell her about my personal situation, not yet anyway. I just wanted a solid plan to build my wealth. As I started working with Sarah, I learned more about the nuances of investing, and I realized how much I had been missing out on. I began to feel empowered. Each investment I made felt like a step toward taking control of my life. I started focusing on stocks that were on the rise, tech companies that were innovative, and even some mutual funds that promised solid returns. I felt like I was finally making decisions for myself, unshackled from the emotional weight that Jessica had placed on me. Meanwhile, my home life was increasingly strained. Jessica and I were living like strangers. She would come home late, often reeking of perfume I didn't recognize, and she would brush off my inquiries about her whereabouts with excuses that felt increasingly flimsy. I began to see the cracks in her facade. The tension was palpable, but I was determined to keep my composure. I had a plan, and I wouldn't let her see the storm brewing beneath. My calm exterior. One night after a particularly late meeting, Jessica came home, and I could tell she had been drinking. She slurred her words as she walked in, and I felt a surge of anger, but I kept it in check. Instead, I decided to play the role of the concerned husband, asking her if everything was okay. She rolled her eyes and dismissed me, saying she was just tired of my constant questioning. It was then that I realized how far she had fallen from the person I once knew. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a complete transformation. I continued my investment journey, making smart choices based on my research and the guidance Sarah provided. Each successful trade felt like a victory. I was gaining wealth in ways that Jessica would never imagine, and it fueled my desire for revenge. I wasn't just going to move on, I was going to thrive in ways that she would eventually regret. As the weeks turned into months, I became more financially stable, but I also knew that I needed to confront the situation head-on. I was gathering the courage to take the next step. I had to decide when and how to reveal what I knew about her affair and what my future would look like. I wanted to make sure I had the upper hand and I was ready to pull the trigger. The more I worked on my investments, the more I realized I was letting go of the pain. I was turning a corner. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and gaining the freedom I deserved. I felt lighter, more in control of my destiny and ready to confront the future, whatever it may hold. But first, I had to set the stage for my ultimate plan to ensure Jessica wouldn't walk away with anything when the time came. It was time to prepare for the final showdown. With each passing day, I felt more empowered and more in control of my life. My investments were starting to pay off, and the thrill of financial independence was intoxicating. It was like a light was slowly breaking through the fog of betrayal that had clouded my mind. However, I also knew that I had to confront Jessica directly about her infidelity, and that moment was drawing closer. My instincts told me it was time to prepare for the ultimate showdown. I started gathering all the evidence I had meticulously collected over the past few months. The screenshots of her texts with Ryan, her late-night excuses, even photos of her and Ryan together that I had discreetly managed to snap when I saw them out in public. I wanted to make sure I had everything in place before I initiated the confrontation. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure that she understood the gravity of her actions and the consequences that would follow. One evening, I decided to confront her. I chose a time when she was home, and I knew she would be sober and somewhat relaxed. I could sense the tension building in the air as I prepared myself. I rehearsed what I was going to say in my head. I wanted to maintain my composure, but I also wanted my words to cut deep. I knew this could be the last chance I had to address this betrayal before moving on completely. Jessica, I started, my voice steady and calm. We need to talk. She looked up from her phone, surprise washing over her face. What about? She replied, a hint of annoyance creeping into her tone. I took a deep breath and laid out everything. I told her I'd been aware of her affair with Ryan for months. I didn't want to scream or shout, I wanted to present the facts. As I listed out the evidence, I watched her face transform from confusion to panic. I could see her processing each piece of information I laid out before her. Matt, you don't understand, she exclaimed, trying to regain her composure. I was just venting to him. You don't know the whole story. The whole story, I interrupted, feeling the anger rise within me. What part of sneaking around and texting him late at night was just venting? You've been lying to me, Jessica. You've been betraying our marriage. She started to backpedal, throwing excuses at me like they were confetti. I was unhappy. You never paid attention to me. I needed someone who understood me, and Ryan was there. The excuses rolled off her tongue, each one more ridiculous than the last. I could feel my heart race as she tried to shift the blame onto me. Painting herself as the victim in this twisted tale, I focused on keeping my emotions in check. This isn't about me, Jessica. This is about you cheating on me. You made a choice, and now you have to face the consequences. Consequences, she scoffed, her voice rising defensively. What are you going to do, Matt? Are you going to throw me out like I'm some criminal? You don't want a divorce, do you? I paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. I had thought long and hard about what I wanted, and I knew that moving forward meant letting go of the life we had built together. Jessica, I don't think we can come back from this. Trust is the foundation of a marriage, and you've shattered ours. I don't want to be in a relationship where I have to question your loyalty. Her face fell. I could see the realization hit her, and for a brief moment I saw vulnerability peek through her tough exterior. But we can work through this. I'll end things with Ryan, I promise. She pleaded, her voice a mix of desperation and denial. I shook my head, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. This isn't something that can just be fixed with promises. You've not only hurt me, but you've made a mockery of our vows. I can't trust you anymore. That was the moment I knew I had to follow through with my plan. I had spent months preparing myself for this confrontation, and now it was time to execute the next phase. I calmly informed her of my decision. I'm filing for divorce. I've already consulted with a lawyer, and I'm making sure to protect my assets. Her reaction was nothing short of explosive. She shouted, cried, and tried to manipulate me into reconsidering. You'll regret this. You won't be able to find someone better than me. She screamed, her voice rising to a pitch I had never heard before. It was a mix of anger and panic as she realized the full scope of what was happening. But I stood firm. I had made up my mind, and I wouldn't allow her to turn this around on me any longer. I had taken control of my future, and I wasn't going to let her derail my plans. I knew she would fight back, but I was prepared for it. I had done the groundwork, and I was ready to face whatever consequences came my way. As she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I had faced the truth, stood my ground, and drawn the line in the sand. I was no longer the victim. I was taking charge of my life. My journey to reclaiming my happiness was just beginning, and I was ready to follow through on the promise I made to myself. I would ensure that Jessica would receive nothing in this divorce, and I would secure my financial future while moving forward with my life. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done feeling powerless. The aftermath of that confrontation was like a whirlwind. It felt surreal, as if I had just stepped out of a storm into the eye of it. Jessica didn't accept the news of the divorce gracefully. She spent days trying to convince me to change my mind, throwing accusations and playing the victim. I had expected some resistance, but I was taken aback by how frantic she became. She'd call me incessantly, sending angry texts, and even attempted to reach out to mutual friends to spin her narrative. At first, it was infuriating. I felt like I was being dragged back into the emotional turmoil I thought I had left behind. But then, I remembered my plan. I had made a decision to focus on my future, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. I started surrounding myself with supportive friends who understood what I was going through. I poured my energy into work and my investments, working closely with Sarah to ensure I was securing my financial future. The more I got involved in my investments, the better I felt. I was learning to read the market, understand trends, and even pick up some tips on trading strategies. My confidence was building in ways I had never anticipated. I started attending investment workshops and networking events, all while distancing myself from Jessica's drama. This was my rebirth, and I was determined to make it count. In the midst of this personal growth, I realized I needed to prepare for the legal battle ahead. I had consulted with my lawyer, Lisa, and we had discussed strategies to ensure that Jessica wouldn't take advantage of my hard-earned wealth. I had kept meticulous records of all my investments, bank statements, and assets that I had acquired before our marriage. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. The day came for the initial proceedings, and I walked into the courtroom feeling a mix of nerves and determination. I had never envisioned myself in a legal setting like this, but here I was, ready to defend my financial future. Jessica arrived with a smug look, as if she still believed she could charm her way into a favorable outcome. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the absurdity of it all. She had no idea what I had prepared for. As we sat across from each other, I could see her glancing at me with annoyance, probably trying to gauge my emotional state. I maintained a calm exterior. I had been through the emotional ringer, and I wasn't about to let her see me sweat now. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. My lawyer presented my case with clarity and confidence, laying out the evidence of my investments, my financial stability, and the fact that Jessica had squandered our shared funds during our marriage. Jessica's lawyer attempted to counter with claims of emotional distress and how she needed support after the trauma of our marriage. I could hardly contain my disdain for the theatrics. It was clear that they were trying to paint me as the villain, but I had all my evidence lined up perfectly, and I felt a surge of satisfaction as I saw the cracks in their arguments. As the hearings unfolded, I realized how weak Jessica's position truly was. She had no substantial claim to my investments, as I had been diligent about keeping my finances separate. The judge seemed to see through her attempts to manipulate the situation, dismissing her emotional pleas as irrelevant to the matter at hand. I felt a sense of vindication. I wasn't just fighting for my assets. I was also fighting to reclaim my dignity. After several hearings, it became evident that Jessica was becoming increasingly desperate. She tried everything from accusing me of being controlling to claiming that I had hidden assets. But my lawyer and I had prepared for these tactics. We had documented everything, and it wasn't long before Jessica's facade began to crumble. The judge wasn't buying her story, and I could see the frustration etched on her face. This was my moment. I had worked hard to build a foundation for my financial future, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with anything. As the days of hearings dragged on, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was finally taking charge of my life, and the more I fought, the more I realized how far I had come since that fateful day when I discovered her betrayal. One evening, after a particularly tough day in court, I returned home and decided to unwind. I poured myself a drink and reflected on how much I had changed. I was no longer that naive husband who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was a man who could stand his ground, fight for what was right, and forge a new path. The bitterness of my past began to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. It was during this period of reflection that I had a conversation with Sarah, my financial advisor, who had become a close friend throughout this journey. She saw the transformation within me and encouraged me to keep pushing forward. "You've come so far, Matt. Don't lose sight of your goals," she said, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. I appreciated her support and began to realize that I was not just seeking revenge on Jessica, I was also investing in my own happiness. As the court proceedings continued, I decided it was time to finalize my plans. I wanted to ensure that when the dust settled, Jessica would understand that she had lost not just a husband but the opportunity to benefit from my hard work. I began strategizing my next moves, both in the courtroom and in my investments, and my focus sharpened. I was ready to turn the page and close the chapter on this painful part of my life, once and for all. It was time to ensure that Jessica received nothing, and I was determined to see my plan through to the end. As the court proceedings progressed, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. The final hearings were approaching, and the weight of the entire situation was beginning to lift. I had poured myself into my work, my investments, and my personal growth, and it showed. The man I was now had more confidence, clarity, and determination than I had ever possessed. I was ready to close the door on my past and step into a future that was entirely my own. One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer, Lisa. She informed me that Jessica's legal team was proposing a settlement. I hadn't anticipated this turn of events, and my initial reaction was skeptical. "What are they offering?" I asked, my tone cautious. Lisa explained that Jessica wanted to avoid further proceedings and was willing to accept a lump sum payment in exchange for relinquishing any claims to my investments and assets. I couldn't help but feel a mix of surprise and vindication. It seemed that the reality of her situation was finally sinking in. Her grand plans to manipulate the outcome of the divorce were crumbling, and now she was ready to cut her losses. "What do you think?" Lisa asked, gauging my reaction. I considered the offer carefully. On one hand, accepting a settlement would mean putting this entire ordeal behind me and moving forward with my life. On the other hand, I wanted to make sure that Jessica understood the full impact of her betrayal. "I want to think about it," I replied, needing time to weigh my options. I knew I had the upper hand, but I also didn't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. I took a day to reflect and consult with my closest friends. They advised me to take the settlement, but also to ensure that I didn't let Jessica off too easily. After careful consideration, I decided to counter her offer. I wanted to make sure that if we settled, it would be on my terms. I called Lisa and instructed her to negotiate a better deal, one that reflected both my losses and the emotional toll this ordeal had taken on me. I made it clear that I wasn't going to let her walk away with just a small payout while I had lost so much more. A week later, Jessica's team reached out again with a revised offer. This time, it was more generous, and I found myself contemplating it seriously. As I reviewed the details, I noticed that it included not only a monetary payout, but also a clause that ensured she would have no claim to any future investments or assets I acquired after the divorce was finalized. This was significant. It felt like the perfect way to safeguard my future while closing this painful chapter. When the day of the final hearing arrived, I walked into the courtroom feeling a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Jessica was already there, looking tense. I noticed she had changed her appearance. Her makeup was heavier and she wore a new dress, perhaps an attempt to show me what I was missing. But I was unfazed. I had moved on in so many ways, emotionally, financially, and mentally. I was no longer the man she had betrayed. As the proceedings began, Lisa laid out our final proposal for the court, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. I watched Jessica's lawyer attempt to argue against the settlement, but their arguments were weak and ultimately fell flat. I could see Jessica's frustration boiling beneath the surface as she realized that her attempts to manipulate the situation were failing. The judge, who had seen enough of Jessica's theatrics, decided to expedite the proceedings. "This court will not entertain further delays. Mr. Matthews, do you wish to accept the settlement?" he asked, looking directly at me. I nodded resolutely. "Yes, Your Honor, I accept the settlement as laid out." A sense of relief washed over me as I spoke the words. This was it. I was finally closing the door on this painful chapter of my life. Jessica's face fell, and the reality of her situation began to sink in. The judge approved the settlement, and with that, my heart raced with a mixture of triumph and liberation. I had fought hard for my future, and I wasn't going to let her past actions dictate my life any longer. Jessica was left with nothing but the consequences of her choices, and I was more than ready to embrace the next chapter. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months was lifted, and I was ready to move forward. I knew I had come out of this stronger and wiser. I had learned valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and self-worth. In the days that followed, I focused on celebrating this new beginning. I reached out to my friends, and we organized a small gathering to mark the end of a significant chapter in my life. As we shared laughter and memories, I felt a sense of camaraderie and support that I hadn't realized I had missed. I was grateful for their presence and encouragement, and I knew I was ready for whatever came next. In the weeks ahead, I continued to invest my time in my work and financial ventures. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, and my future was looking brighter than ever. I met with Sarah regularly, discussing new investment opportunities and strategies that could help me grow my wealth further. I was excited about what lay ahead, and this time it was all about me. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons learned. I had faced betrayal head-on and emerged from it with a newfound strength. I had taken control of my life and refused to let anyone else dictate my happiness. I was ready to embrace new opportunities and perhaps even new relationships when the time felt right. I knew that I would always carry the scars of this experience, but I also understood that they were a part of my journey. They had shaped me into a stronger, more resilient person, and I was ready to take on whatever came next with open arms. The future was mine for the taking, and I was determined to make it count. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself navigating through the aftermath of the divorce with a renewed sense of self. The initial relief I felt after the courtroom victory morphed into a determination to fully embrace this new chapter of my life. I was enjoying the freedom that came with being single again, and I was committed to making the most of my newfound independence. With the settlement finalized, I was able to focus on what truly mattered: my career and my personal growth. My investment portfolio was thriving, and I found a sense of empowerment in managing my finances. I was making smart decisions and learning to trust my instincts in ways I never had before. Sarah continued to guide me, and our professional relationship blossomed into a genuine friendship. She admired my tenacity and encouraged me to pursue my passions beyond just investing. One day, as we reviewed my latest investments, Sarah asked me, "What's next for you, Matt? What do you really want to achieve?" The question caught me off guard, and I took a moment to reflect. Honestly, I wanted to experience life without the shadows of betrayal clouding my judgment. I had spent years working hard in my career, but I had neglected some of the things I loved. I had dreams beyond just accumulating wealth. I wanted to travel, write, and maybe even explore romantic relationships again when I felt ready. I decided to take a leap and planned a solo trip to Europe. It had always been a dream of mine, and I figured there was no better time to explore my passions than now. I booked my flight and arranged a whirlwind itinerary that would take me to Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. The excitement bubbled within me as I envisioned wandering through historic streets, tasting new cuisines, and soaking in the cultures that had long captivated my imagination. On the day of my departure, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. As the plane took off, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. I had been someone who had allowed betrayal to define me, but now I was taking control of my narrative. My heart was lighter, and I felt like I was finally ready to embrace life on my own terms. In Paris, I visited the Eiffel Tower and strolled along the Seine, losing myself in the beauty of the city. I savored croissants at quaint cafes, wrote in my journal beside the artists in Montmartre, and felt a sense of liberation that I hadn't experienced in years. I met fellow travelers who shared their stories, and I realized that everyone had faced their own battles. This trip became more than just a vacation. It was a journey of rediscovery. As I moved on to Rome, I marveled at the history that surrounded me. I stood in awe of the Colosseum, imagining the lives that had unfolded there centuries ago. In a small trattoria, I enjoyed pasta like I had never tasted before, laughing with locals and other travelers over a shared meal. Each day felt like a celebration of life, and I began to understand the importance of creating joyful memories. In Barcelona, the vibrant art and architecture of Gaudí stirred something deep within me. I visited La Sagrada Familia, and the intricate beauty of the basilica reminded me that life is a work in progress, always evolving, always under construction. I felt inspired to embrace my journey, scars and all. I even took a painting class, something I had always wanted to try, and rediscovered my love for creativity. The experience reignited a spark that had been dormant for far too long. When I returned home, I felt changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had shed the weight of my past and emerged with a clearer vision of what I wanted. I started writing again, something I had cherished before life got complicated. I began documenting my experiences, my thoughts, and my journey of healing. The pages filled with raw honesty and reflections on love, loss, and rediscovery. I knew I wanted to share my story, not just as a tale of betrayal, but as a testament to resilience and growth. As time went on, I started to feel open to the idea of dating again. I didn't rush into it. Instead, I took my time, enjoying the journey of getting to know myself before involving someone else. I met new people through friends, explored connections slowly, and allowed the possibility of love to blossom organically. Each interaction taught me more about what I wanted in a partner and what I had to offer. Eventually, I met someone special named Emily. She was kind, adventurous, and shared my passion for travel and exploration. Our chemistry was undeniable, and as we spent more time together, I felt a sense of ease that I hadn't experienced in years. I was grateful for the lessons Jessica had unintentionally taught me. I knew the importance of trust and communication. Emily and I built our relationship on those foundations, and it felt refreshing to embrace love without the shadows of the past weighing me down. Reflecting on everything I had gone through, the betrayal, the pain, the journey to reclaim my life, I felt an immense sense of gratitude. I had learned that resilience is born from adversity, and every setback is an opportunity for growth. I wasn't just a survivor, I was a thriver. Now, as I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping coffee and writing in my journal, I smiled at the path I had taken. I was no longer defined by betrayal. I was defined by my ability to rise, to learn, and to embrace life with open arms. My story was mine to tell, and I was ready to share it with others who might need to hear that they too could emerge stronger from their struggles. I knew that life would continue to bring its challenges, but I was prepared to face them head-on, one day at a time.